welcome Conrad Irwin, who previously founded the email client Superhuman and is now at Zed, as it says on screen. Conrad?
All right, we're going to talk about Vim. Who here uses Vim on the regular, or NeoVim, or the Vim mode in the IDE? Oh my goodness, this is going to be fun. Okay, who doesn't yet use Vim but feels like they probably should? Okay. And out of interest, has anyone used Vim regularly in the past but now given it up? Oh, a couple of you. But no, that ruins my joke, because usually people say that it's not easy to quit Vim. I'm Conrad. I maintain Zed's Vim mode. I didn't used to do that. I had a sensible job. But the last time I was looking for work, a friend of mine introduced me to the Zed team. I got coffee with Nathan, who runs the company, and we had a great conversation. I love working on tools that help people be productive, and I was excited to work on something I would use every day, like a text editor. But as the conversation was wrapping up, I realized I'd forgotten something. But Nathan, I tried Zed, and I can't use it. Oh, why not? I use Vim. And he looked at me as though that wasn't really an explanation. Well, we have Vim mode. Well, I know. I tried it, and it sucks. And at this point, I realized I probably wasn't going to get a job at Zed. But luckily, Nathan continued with, oh, so do you want to fix it? And I said, sure, okay, yeah. And before I said, sure, okay, yeah, I should have done a lot more research. So Vim is over 1 million lines of C. It contains an entire programming language with 2 mutually unintelligible dialects. Luckily, neither is Rust. And it's been being worked on since 1988, making it significantly more mature than I am. And it also turns out that Vim users, all of you, are a picky bunch. If it doesn't work exactly right, it doesn't work. And one of 2 things can happen. In the good case, a GitHub issue is filed, we can work on it together and make progress. And in the bad case, people just bounce. Your Vim mode sucks. So let me give an example of the kind of detail that we're talking about. In Vim, the dot command redoes the previous action. And so, for example, I can make this word uppercase with GUE, and then go to the next line. Dot does the same thing. Sounds simple. But not everything counts. And so, for example, if I copy, dot is still going to uppercase. Copy doesn't count. Similarly, undo, dot is still going to uppercase. Well, maybe that's not too bad. We'll just remember the last action, but from the allow list of repeatable actions. But there's more. One of the other things that you can do with dot is repeat insert. So if I go here, and I do 3.5, for example, and then I do dot, as you might expect, it's going to give me another line that says 3.5. Okay, so we'll remember the action from the allow list. We'll remember the text inserted if the action ended in insert, either an insert itself or substitute or replace or any of those. But there's more. So let's say, for example, I select this whole line with V, and then I uppercase it again with the tilde key, and then I go up here. Dot is going to uppercase the line. I mean, of course it is. That's what I just did. But how did it know? It knows because not only does it remember the action and the insert, it remembers the previous selection and the mode and the size of it so that it can redo what was happening. And one final little complexity in here, which I kind of like, if you use a count, most Vim actions take a count. I can do 3 tilde to make 3 letters lowercase, and I keep pressing dot, it does 3. But if I come down here and I do 2 dot, it's going to do things by 2. So just for this one Vim command, dot, we're keeping track of the most recent command from the allow list, the text inserted, the visual selection, its size and its mode, and the count, but not the count that the user originally did, just the count that was most recently the count. Simple, right? Vim does have some advantages, though. I remember when I was first starting to program, I got an internship at a company called Ept Computing. That's the opposite of inept computing. And that was actually what the company was called. And I showed up a little nervous because I'd been running Linux on my laptop, and I wasn't sure, like, is that okay in a corporate environment? Luckily, it turned out to be, and the other 3 people at the company also ran Linux on their laptop. Also, my xconfig didn't break till week 2. But when I'd moved from Windows, I was using Notepad++. I moved to Linux, I started using Kate, which is a cool little editor in KDE. But as I looked around at my colleagues and I started working with them on things, I realized that no one else uses Kate at all. And instead, they spent all of their days in the terminal, furiously typing, never using the mouse or touching the touchpad at all. And yet somehow, with no fuss, working code appeared. With no panels, with no UI, with no AI agents, it just did. And it was kind of mind-blowing. So in my shy intern way, I plucked up the courage to ask, well, what text editor are you using? And the answer, of course, was Vim. I then said something that I regret to this day. I said, Vim, isn't that super old? And I don't remember what the response was, but suffice it to say that I spent the rest of the internship, half my time was spent coding productively, and the other half was spent editing vimrc, and the third half that I don't talk about was restarting my terminal to try and get it back into a working state. One of my favorite Vim commands to demo is Control-A. So for those of you that don't know yet, if you have a number and you want it to go bigger, you can Control-A. If you want it to go smaller, you can Control-X. This, as with all the other commands, pairs with a count. And so I can, 13 Control-A, and I get 14. Kind of cool. Probably the hardest to use calculator ever invented. This also works in hex. So if we make this a hexadecimal number, and then, I add 10, well, if I do it right, 10, Control-A, then we get up to 1F. This is very cool. And I use it occasionally. But what I actually more often want to do is create a list, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And how do we do that? Obviously, I could type it out, but where would be the fun in that? So we can reuse the repeated insert again. So if I insert 10 zeros with 10 I0, I'm going to make the font size a little bit smaller so you can see all 10 of them. There we go. I could try and use Control-A again. So if I select the whole file and then do Control-A, it doesn't do what I want. And that's because Control-A is increment a number, and if you have a bunch of numbers selected, it's just going to increment them. Instead, we're going to reach for the related command. And in Vim, there's a pattern. You have the command that's one thing, the related command is probably going to be G and then that thing. So what we're going to want to do is G Control-A. But along the way, I wanted to show off my favorite kind of like least understood or least known about Vim command, which is gv. If v starts visual mode, gv restarts it with the previous selection, so you don't have to recreate it yourself. So I create the selection, I do G, Control-A, and just as you might expect, I get the numbers 1 through 10. Very cool. But that's not all. Everything in Vim pairs with a count. So let me undo this again, pick a number, let's say, well, first recreate the selection. Then pick a number, let's say 7, do 7, G, Control-A, and I get my 7 times tables. Which is obviously completely useless in practice. But but it like shows Vim's approach to user design, right? You have one small primitive and you have a bunch of different ways of expressing it, and you can end up with something surprisingly powerful. I did some Twitter research on what can Vim be used for, and this came out. I asked the AI, what's this all about? And it doesn't know either. Anyway, that's completely unrelated to the talk. Moving on. One of the fun things about talking about Vim in the Netherlands is Vim is from here. Bram Molenaar, who created it, is from Lisse, a town about an hour to the west of here. And a lot of what I think makes Vim Vim and what makes Vim so good to use, I think, is based on him and how he ran the project. So he worked on it from 1988 till 2023. It's a long time to write software. And he was known not for being the Linus Torvalds of like email blast bombs, but as someone who is a calm and quiet and competent leader. And his kind of two things were that code exists to do good in the world. Vim itself is obviously charityware, but also that Vim is for people and by people. And so he brings people along, and you can feel it when you use Vim. You have this small set of kind of verbs and actions that combine together to build this amazing thing. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think he's someone to emulate. And as we're trying to build out the open source software that is Zed, trying to push that approach of building it for the people, by the people in there. What was I going to say next? So as part of the research for this talk, I reached out to the internet and I said, so can you tell me, like, what are your favorite Vim things? What are the things that make you go, wow, when you use them? And I got back this pretty fun thing from Jamie, :/%. Makes sense, right? So let's unpack this a little bit. In Vim, : puts you in command mode. Command mode is temporary X mode, and it's so called because it puts you in an X mode that's done after one command. And it's easy to forget that Vim didn't start from a text editor that we know today with a cursor, and then they added all this complicated stuff. It started from a command mode. And that's because in the 60s, you didn't have screens, right? If you typed into the computer, it would print out the response on a piece of paper. The thing that's kind of wild to me in hindsight is that if you're editing a file, and you want to see what's in the file, you can ask for it to print out certain lines. You then make a bunch of changes, and you have to remember what your file looks like, because it hasn't printed it out yet. It would have been a horrible waste of trees if every time you did up, down, left, right, the entire file is printed again with a little line for where you are. So they didn't do that. So Ed is often given the credit for being like the first remembered text editor, and it went through a bunch of rewrites and reiterations through the course of the 1960s. You had Ed, and then someone built M, which was Ed improved, and then N, M+1, and finally X, which was the extended version of Ed. And as the decades moved from the 60s to the 70s, Bill Joy got his hands on a screen terminal that could actually show things in real time. And I'm confident it was exactly 80 columns wide, because otherwise it would have been wrong. And what he realized was he could take the X editor that he'd been working on, and he could add a mode to it where you could see what was going on, visual mode. And the way that you got into that was : VI. And so you could then see the file you were editing, and you could see your cursor in it and what you were changing. And I cannot imagine how mind-blowing that must have been the first time. It's like, wow. So it was so popular, they added a symlink on Unix. VI is a symlink to X that boots X in visual mode. Obviously, today, the situation is reversed. You probably still have an X command in your shell. And if you run it, you'll find yourself in Vim in X mode, which you probably don't want to be. But it exists in case you do. So back to the example. : is going to put us in command mode. Once we have a : exclamation mark is how we run shell commands. I mostly use this for JSON formatting. So if, like me, you get a whole bunch of JSON on one line, you can select it, and then with an exclamation mark, run it through JQ, and you can get it nicely formatted and hopefully readable. Someone, presumably Bram, but maybe someone else, figured out that if you have a text editor, and you're editing text files, and you can run shell commands, 99% of the time, you're going to want to edit or run the command based on the file that you're currently in. And so they added the ability to specify a percentage in these files. So if I wanted to find out how many lines I have, I could run : WC-W, and then just percentage instead of the file name. And then we'll find out that I have maybe 31 words in here. So back to the original example. Hopefully it's kind of clear now what is going on. If we have a : an exclamation mark, and a // and a percentage, we're going to be running the current file in the current directory. And so if you happen to edit bash scripts in Vim, you can run them with : exclamation mark, // percentage. Pretty cool. So I don't know. This again is like Vim. You have all these small primitives, you combine them together, and you get something much more powerful than you would ever have expected. Yeah. This is not actually the Z logo, for those of you who are curious. Obviously, I've been, alighting around the edges a bit. I've been talking about Vim, but pretty much showing you everything in Z. Z is the code editor for what's next. We built it from the ground up in Rust. We wanted it to be really fast. We engineered it like a video game, so we can deliver frames to the GPU in milliseconds. And when people talk to me about switching from Vim to Z, and they complain about a lot of things too, but the things that they like are that it feels like Vim. And why does it feel like Vim? Well, there is no latency. It is instant. It feels fast. There's not too much UI stuff getting in the way to distract you. And so kind of a plea. If you haven't tried Z yet, please do. And if you have tried it and you left because the Vim mode sucks, come talk to me and we can hopefully fix it. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we probably have time for questions. If people want to know kind of more how it works under the hood, I'm happy to talk about that.
Hi, thank you for the call. Sorry for the talk. It was brilliant. So not much of a question, but I can explain to you that tweet about that old remedy about Vim, if you want. Yeah. So you can look it up. Vim is also the name of a general purpose cleaner. You can find it in the cleaning section of any Dutch supermarket. And yeah, it's super funny that, I was literally like doing groceries, then I turn around and I see Vim, and I'm like, okay, I'm going crazy. I see Vim everywhere now. But no, it's for people outside of this room, Vim is something you clean with, not something you write programs with.
Thank you very much.
Another question, anyone? I'll first go there and then. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. What I really like about JetBrains implementation of Vim mode is that they support Vim script. So you can basically just throw your Vim RC onto there and all your keywords work and everything. Last time I checked, Z didn't. Is there a plan to support that, or maybe Lua scripting? Because last time I saw you just have to edit JSON files or something.
Yeah, that's right. So right now Z is purely JSON, and that's kind of the big missing piece. Are we ever going to implement Vim script? Probably not. There's a couple of reasons for that, one of which it's a terrible programming language, and the other of which it's a lot of complexity to bring into Z. So as we're thinking about the extensibility story for Z in general, what we'll likely do is expose some kind of interface so we can run extensions off the main thread. Obviously, one of the things that makes VimScript kind of work really well with Vim is that they have the single main threaded loop. And credit to the NeoVim team, the big innovation of NeoVim was like breaking out of that main thread and allowing multiple processes to be used. And so if we build an extension API to Z, it's likely to be more like the NeoVim Lua running in the side and sending async requests to the editor. But will we ever get to a world where we can just run a Vim plugin unchanged in Z? I don't think so. Partly we wouldn't want to for the performance reasons of running untrusted code on the main thread, and partly there are better ways of solving those problems, I think.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I actually wanted to ask some questions, so I came to the second one, which is people who don't use Beam but Cocoon or Helix, for example. Is there an initiative to put something similar in Z? Yes,
and it's kind of new. We have maybe 4 or 5 pull requests that have gone in so far, just to kind of pave the way. Vim is a full-time thing, and I only get to spend half my time on it. Helix is another full-time thing, and so what I've tried to do is set myself up to help the community build the Helix stuff. We have most of the basics there already, but it's not like Vim. So one thing I was going to mention in the talk, but I forgot about, when we run the Z tests, we run NeoVim and Z in parallel and send the same keystrokes, and if Z diverges from NeoVim, that's a failure. For Helix, we're a long way away from being able to do that because we haven't built all the stuff. But if you're just looking for a mode where you can do motion then action instead of action then motion, we already kind of have that built into a Helix mode. But PR's welcome on the Helix stuff.
I was actually just going to ask, like, those commands look cool, but how do you know they work?
Well, because of the tests.
Because of the tests.
Yeah.
What does it look like to implement this stuff in Rust? Like, you're re-implementing in a whole new language. Does Rust make that easier, or how's that go?
Well, if you look at the original Vim, it's kind of cool. It has basically a loop, and at the top of the loop is getC. Like, they're pulling a character off standard in, run the loop, wait for the next character to come in, which is kind of a nice and simple programming model that has all the problems we were talking about with the event loop blocking. Rust is not like that. Rust is very async. We have the main thread that runs, which all the input is handled on. We have the background threads that are doing all the editor processing. And so kind of by virtue of an architecture that has learned about multiple CPUs since the days that Vim was written, it's more complicated for those reasons. But that definitely makes some things easier. If you look at the get C code that's a loop, they do all kinds of crazy C stuff in there that doesn't make me super comfortable. And at least in Rust, I can be sure that it's not going to do too much damage if I get the indexes off by 1.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk. Speaking for myself, but I think for a lot of people migrating from Vim is the biggest trouble is relearning the muscle memory.
Mm-hmm.
You know, besides being a dogmatic, pedantic developer. Again, speaking for myself. So there's one crazy anomaly here is that lazy Vim got ridiculously popular, and there are even a lot of old school Vim users just switched to lazy Vim because fuck it just works. And when I think about it, I think the big thing he did was having this stupid pop-up that you can disable that just shows the next key binding. And if it's slightly different, it makes migrating so much easier because you can... Yeah, is that which key? Yeah, exactly. Have you considered?
Yes, I want to build it. I just haven't got around to it yet. So it's a very common request. Helix has this too, but many of the Vim commands are multi-character, like G uppercase U for uppercase. It would be super nice when you press G, you get a list of all the characters you can type. The challenge that I see with that is that there's 52 of them, right? You type G and then pretty much every letter character that you can do in either case works. And so figuring out how to make that menu useful but not intrusive, I think that's kind of like the piece that's challenging.
I think which key absolutely brute forces it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it works.
It does, and we will add something like that. There's enough people who want it, and to me, it's thinking about like the for the people by the people kind of thing. If you want people to know how your software works, you have to show them, and right now you just have to know.
Thanks.
So that was the final question. Thank you for your great talk.
Thank you all.